T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. On tonight's episode, I'm going to be giving you guys my reactions to Bears-Vikings. Also going to dive into the Carolina Panthers. Finally kicking Frank Reich to the curb. Got some interesting talks on that. Also, Mike Elko is going to be Texas A&M's new head coach, and we're going to dive into a couple of more of college football and NFL topics. Before we begin, if you haven't already, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that every episode of the podcast that's uploaded on the channel is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, leave us with a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Share the pod with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. We will greatly appreciate it. Now, the Minnesota Vikings lost to the Chicago Bears. This was an awful game out of Minnesota's offense. Joshua Dobbs, he played awful in this game. And here's the thing about Joshua Dobbs. Let's face it. At best, this dude is a really good quality backup quarterback and a low-end starter. And when you have a guy like Joshua Dobbs, he's really similar to Gardner Minshew. He's one of those quarterbacks that'll have a couple of stretch of games where people say, oh man, like this dude may be good enough to be a low-end starter. And then he'll have a game like what he had tonight against the Chicago Bears, where he reminds you why he's a backup quarterback and why he got traded from Arizona to Minnesota in the first place. And the Minnesota Vikings, you know, this was a game that they needed to win to stay ahead of the playoff pack, because the Rams are starting to get hot. Jordan Love is starting to figure things out. And the Green Bay Packers got a really talented team when they're fully healthy. And as long as Jordan Love continues to play the way he's had the last couple of weeks, Green Bay definitely could be a team that takes that last playoff spot from Minnesota. The Minnesota Vikings, I can't believe they lost to the Chicago Bears. Now, the Bears defense, to their credit, they have done a really good job at forcing turnovers in their last couple of games. They forced a lot of turnovers against the Detroit Lions last week, but they lost that game. And in this game, they won because Justin Fields was finally able to deliver in the closing minutes of a game. And even then, with Justin Fields having a pretty solid performance, he nearly gave it away. He fumbled the football, which gave the Minnesota Vikings a little bit of hope. You see, Justin Fields, I don't think he's doing himself any favors with how he's performed this season. You see, the Bears are still on the fence, rather if they should build around this guy long term or if they should go ahead and draft Caleb Williams. And you see, Justin Fields, he's not making the decision any easier. Because if you're Ryan Poles or whoever is going to be part of the Bears front office next season, rather if it's him or somebody else, you got to sit back and watch the film, and you're going to watch games like this and you're going to say, okay, yeah, he gave us the win, but is he good enough to continue to do this on a consistent basis? Basically, the discussion is going to be who's the better quarterback right now, Caleb Williams or Justin Fields. And right now, I still will go Caleb Williams. Justin Fields in this game, he started out looking like he was Tom Brady. He was like 13 or 14 for 101 passing yards, no picks in the first quarter. And then after that, he got really cold. Brian Flores and that Vikings defense, they were really getting after him, especially in third down situations. The offensive line kind of broke down in a couple of those spots as well. But there were some throws on third down that Justin Fields missed. He missed DJ Moore on one. He had a bad throw to Darnell Mooney. You know, this is an okay performance out of Justin Fields, but it's not one of those performances that make you go, oh yeah, this dude has what it takes to be our franchise quarterback for the foreseeable future. Now, the Bears defense has been playing some really good football. And this was a defense that was dealing with injuries earlier on during this season. And then they now started to get a little healthy, although they did lose two of their best players to injuries throughout this game. They lost their cornerback, Kyler Gordon. Jaquan Brisker got banged up as well, so hopefully those guys are able to stay healthy. And their defensive line played really good in this game. They did a really good job at slowing down the run game of Minnesota. They were on everything, and they were really harassing Joshua Dobbs. The majority of Joshua Dobbs' mistakes was when he had pressure in his face, and his decision-making just got rattled. And you see, when Joshua Dobbs has been at his best, it's been when he's had time to sit back and throw the ball inside the pocket. He's been able to get outside the pocket and extend plays, but the Bears were getting consistent pressure on him, and they did a really good job at turning over the football with the way that they caught these interceptions. Some of them were tip passes. One of their cornerbacks had knocked the ball out of the wide receiver's hands. It flew in the air and somebody else came and cleaned it up. This is a Bears defense that is playing some really inspired football, and their schedule over the next couple of weeks, believe it or not, is not really that tough. And if they could win at least, 3 more games, they could put themselves right back in the playoff conversation. Believe it or not, yeah, they got to play the Lions, but after that, you play the Browns, the Cardinals, the Falcons, and the Packers to close the season. Those are all winnable games if this defense continues to play the way that it has over the last 2-3 weeks. But the offense still needs to be way better than what we saw today. They left a lot of points off the field, especially when they got inside the red zone, and they didn't do a really good job at, getting points off turnovers. For a team that turned the ball over as many times as what Minnesota did, looking like Santa's helpers out there, you would think that Chicago would have won this game by more than 2 points. You see, this is still the sign that the Bears are just not a good team, and with their last 4 games coming up, I think this is going to be a really good measuring stick to determine if Matt Eberflus is the guy or not, because at this point, this is the healthiest that they've kind of been this season. Justin Fields is fully healthy. It's not really any more excuses you can make for Chicago at least not being able to win 8 games. If they can't get to 8 wins, maybe 9, there's no reason why Matt Eberflus should still be the head coach for the foreseeable future. But the Bears beat the Minnesota Vikings 12-10 Monday Night Football. Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comment section down below. The Carolina Panthers finally took out the trash today. They have fired Frank Reich after 11 games where we're seeing this offense look terrible. Bryce Young hasn't looked great. And Frank Reich, this dude was a shitty head coach. He was Urban Meyer bad. You see, people are trying to make it seem like the decision to draft Bryce Young is one of the worst decisions of all time, and it's not. It's unfair to call Bryce Young a bust when he's been given a terrible situation led by a terrible head coach. And there were some people who I was going back and forth with on Instagram saying that Frank Reich needed more time. He didn't have enough talent around him. Like, no. Frank Reich is the reason why this team was as bad as what it was, because of poor roster management, poor scheme. When your rookie quarterback plays this bad, and he's supposed to be a really good prospect, there's a problem with the coaching. And Trevor Lawrence had a similar situation in his rookie season when Urban Meyer was his head coach. And you saw how better Trevor Lawrence has looked since year one with Urban compared to how good he is right now with Doug Peterson. You see, Frank Reich having Adam Thielen as his number one wide receiver was a problem. The offensive line was worse this season than what it was last season. At the end of last season, Carolina had a top 12 offensive line. The defense is the only bright spot about this team. The offense, anytime you're an offensive-minded coach and your offense struggles to put up 17, 20 points, they're not good. There's no reason why Frank Reich deserved any more time. And David Tepper, this dude has no problem with sticking his hands in the cookie jar. The sign of a good owner, a good CEO, is somebody who hires employees and allows them to do their job. So word on the street is that C.J. Stroud was the preferred quarterback by Frank Reich in this coaching staff. And apparently David Tepper said, "No, fuck that. Draft Bryce Young. Either you draft him or you're going to get the pink slip." So, of course, they got to listen to their boss and they got to draft Bryce Young. And anytime you have situations like this, when you have a controlling owner that doesn't allow the coaches to make the decisions or allows the guys that they hire to make the decisions, you're not going to have a really good football team, because leadership has to be good all the way from the top. And David Tepper hasn't proven to be a good leader. Carolina has had so many head coaches ever since they parted ways with Ron Rivera. And a common denominator that you kind of hear from these head coaching decisions is that David Tepper kind of is a little bit of a control freak. Not even a little bit. He's a big control freak. Now, if we're being honest and unbiased, then we really are looking at this situation from a logical standpoint with how trash the Carolina Panthers roster is on the offensive side of the football. C.J. Stroud wouldn't be any better than what Bryce Young is right now. Now, he would be better, but the Carolina Panthers still would be a crappy football team. You see, Houston, they did a better job at finding a way to build around their young quarterback than what Carolina did. And I'm surprised that their general manager hasn't been fired yet neither, because he's a big reason why this team is as bad as what it was. They traded away DJ Moore, their number one wide receiver, for Bryce Young, when Chicago probably would have taken Brian Burns. You see, it would have hurt to give up Brian Burns. He is a pretty good pass rusher, but he's not an elite one. He's not a Nick Bosa or Marco Parsons or a TJ Watt. And if I'm drafting a quarterback number one overall, I should put more emphasis on building around him versus trying to hold on to a pass rusher. I'd rather have traded Brian Burns instead of having to give up DJ Moore. You see, the Carolina Panthers didn't have a lot of vision with what they wanted to do with a young quarterback. It's just like they was like, fuck it, we just need a young quarterback, and they drafted one, and they were just winging it. And they did a really poor job of setting Bryce Young up for success, and that's a big reason why Frank Reich had to go. For anybody who thought that Frank Reich needed any more times, I really question if you watched the Carolina Panthers play this year. You see, when you have a good coach, you can overcome not having a lot of talent. But Bryce Young looks like a worse quarterback in the NFL than what he ever did at Alabama. And I get tired of people who do all this helmet scouting. If you watched Bryce Young at Alabama, you would know that he wasn't carried by the talent that Bama had. Those were some of the worst teams that Nick Saban ever had. And Nick Saban would tell you that Bryce Young was a large reason why Alabama was able to win the amount of games that they did. After Bryce Young's final season at Alabama, Nick Saban got rid of his whole entire coaching staff. You know what he said? He said that we were too Bryce Young dependent. Bryce Young was a really promising prospect, and he's just been ruined by awful coaching. You see, you people have to stop making this seem like coaching doesn't matter. This shit does matter. Only a casual thinks coaching doesn't matter. CJ Stroud has the Miko Ryans and a really good offensive coordinator. He has a really good situation. Hell, he's better at drafting wide receivers than what the Carolina Panthers are. Outside of DJ Moore, they haven't hit on a single wide receiver in the draft. The Houston Texans, they called up CJ Stroud in the third round. They said, hey, CJ, who do you think we should draft that wide receiver? He said, man, we need to get my boy Tank here. Let's get it. And you see what Tank Dell is doing. Tank Dell would be the number one wide receiver on the Carolina Panthers roster right now. Their most reliable weapons have been old man Adam Thielen and Hayden Hurst. That's a problem. Not to mention that they've overpaid massively for Miles Sanders. They're overpaying for a running back that's not even the best RB on his team. The offensive line stinks. What the hell do you want Bryce Young to do to succeed? This dude has to overcome terrible coaching. You could tell Frank Reich was a bad play caller when he gave it up to the OC. And then he took it back, which apparently set a couple of people in the organization off. This was an awful hire by the Carolina Panthers. And at first, initially, I thought that this was going to be a pretty good hire by them. But I didn't know that Frank Reich just was going to forget how to be a good football coach, because at one point he was a pretty solid coach. But you see, I guess the older he's gotten, the more out of touch he's gotten with the game, because this was an awful coaching tenure that we saw. And this is one of the worst head coaching hires and tenures that has happened in recent memory. This is just as bad as Urban Meyer. I promise you that whoever Carolina hires is going to be good enough to have Bryce Young playing at a good level. I'm getting a little annoyed that people are already writing off Bryce Young and acting like his situation doesn't matter. There's been plenty of quarterbacks who got better coaching after poor rookie seasons who bounced back. Jared Goff, for example, he was awful under Jeff Fisher. They hired Sean McVay, and he's been playing at a pretty solid level ever since. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence. They got rid of Urban Meyer, they kicked his ass to the curb, and they brought in Doug Peterson. The Panthers really need to nail their head coaching hire, and they want to make sure that everything that they gave up for Bryce Young for the number one overall pick last year was warranted, because right now it looks like the Bears are winning this trade. So let me know how you guys are feeling about Carolina finally firing Frank Reich. Who do you like for them to hire to replace him? Texas A&M has a new head coach. Mike Elko is going to be the head coach in College Station for the next couple of years. This was a pretty solid hire by Texas A&M. It's not insanely flashy, because unless you really keep up with the sport, Mike Elko isn't really a huge name that many people are going to know about. But he probably was one of the best head coaching candidates out there, considering what has been out there in this coaching carousel. Outside of Jonathan Smith, Mike Elko has been pretty highly talented. And you look at what he did at Duke, really impressive. He won 9 games at Duke in 2022, his first season, which took a lot of people by surprise, because most people thought that Duke was going to be terrible his first season there. And then they go 7-5 this year, which may not be all that impressive on paper, but they dealt with some injuries to their starting quarterback, Riley Leonard. But they did have some really good performances. They played really great against Notre Dame. They had a big win early on this season when they smacked Clemson. And not just did they smack Clemson, but they embarrassed Clemson. They dominated them. At a school like Duke, to beat Clemson the way that they did is a testament to how good of a coach Mike Elko is. Now, when it comes to evaluating how successful Mike Elko is going to be at Texas A&M, it's going to be measured by, is he going to be able to get this team to the SEC championship? And is this team going to be able to reach the college football under him? Because you see, Texas A&M now, they're a team, they're a program that's good enough where they should be competing for conference titles and the national championship nearly every single year. Mike Elko, he's a pretty good coach when it comes to being able to connect with players. He's also a really good recruiter as well. He did a really good job at acquiring talent via the transfer portal and hitting the recruiting trail pretty good at Duke. And at a school like Texas A&M, with him pretty much having unlimited resources, as much money as he wants to give out to these recruits for NIL deals. I saw a story, and it was a report that said that Jimbo Fisher was so concerned about having a #1 recruiting class a couple of years ago that he hit up 247 Sports to see how their recruiting class rankings work, and he pretty much was buying up all the top recruits without doing due diligence into their character. For Mike Elko, this is a dude who's all about character. He's all about building a program the right way. And with how easy it is to recruit at Texas A&M, Mike Elko should kill it on the recruiting trail. And when it comes to his in-game decision-making, I think he's way better than Jimbo Fisher in that department. Do you know how hard it is to win at Duke? Duke isn't one of these programs that's consistently winning 8-9 games every single season. It's hard to recruit there because of the academic standards. And then 2, you're not really always able to sell people on the idea of playing for Duke, and they don't have a really big NIL backing. And one thing that really pops out to you when you look at Mike Elko's Duke coach teams is that they fight hard. They never quit. They're really gritty. Texas A&M, one thing that I've seen them lack this season is grit and toughness. I mean, they could have beaten Alabama this season. Honestly, it wasn't like Alabama rolled over Texas A&M. Texas A&M is just a team that, under the last couple of seasons of Jimbo Fisher, they haven't had that grittiness and that toughness that it takes to be a championship caliber program. Well, Mike Elko, he should be able to give you this. But at the same time, though, if you ask me how I feel about this hire, I'm still on the fence with it. Because there's been plenty of promising head coaches that I felt who did a really good job winning at programs that didn't have the same amount of resources. And then they get to these programs and they act like they don't know how to use all these unlimited resources. So I still think that this is a pretty good hire. But at the same time, I'm not going to get overly high on this hire. I'm not saying that because it's not a big name hire. Like, I respect what Mike Elko has done. And I feel like at worst, Texas A&M is probably going to win 8-9 games a season under Mike Elko. But to have this team consistently competing for the SEC championship and being in the college football playoffs every single season, those are the expectations for him. And if you're saying otherwise, then you're wrong. A&M is looking for a coach that can get them over the hump anymore. They're no longer a rising powerhouse like how people try to view Arizona State and Arizona. Like, they came close to making it to the playoffs in 2020. They recruit way too good, and they have way too high recruiting classes not to be winning championships. They've had like the top 5 most talented team in college football for the past 3 seasons, and they've never played like that. If Mike Elko can do a really good job recruiting, developing these players, and having these players play at their peak potential, there's no reason why this couldn't be a team to win it all. When's the last time Texas A&M had a first-round pick? I can't remember the last time these boys had a first-round pick since what? Myles Garrett and Luke Joeckel and Mike Evans? That was about it. And Johnny Manziel. So it's like Texas A&M needs somebody who's good with player development. And I think you're getting that. But when it comes to being able to consistently compete for a national championship or being able to compete for the conference, it's really tough. This conference is a dogfight. The majority of college football's highest paid coaches are in the SEC. You got Lane Kiffin. You got Nick Saban, Brian Kelly, Kirby Smart, Josh Heupel is coming up. There are so many great coaches in this conference that for a dude like Mike Elko, I'm just not going to come out and say that you're guaranteed to make it to the top. This is a really good hire in my opinion, but I don't know necessarily if it's going to equate to him necessarily being able to turn Texas A&M into a powerhouse. It's just a little bit too early for me to say that. I need to see the coaching staff. But with the college football playoffs expanding to 12 teams, it has a really good chance of happening. Hell, that thing is probably going to become the Big 10, Big 12, and SEC Invitational. Probably the Big 10 and SEC Invitational. But I think this was a pretty solid hire. I like it. I think it was a little bit better than them initially thinking about hiring Bob Stoops from Kentucky, or not Bob Stoops, Mark Stoops, excuse me. I felt like Mike Elko, with him already having ties to this university, already being a pretty better recruiter than I think what Mark Stoops is. He's a little bit of a better fit for this program. But let me know what you guys are thinking about this hire. down in the comment section down below. The Los Angeles Chargers are now 4-7 after losing to Baltimore on Sunday night. I don't think they're serious about trying to win. And when has this organization ever looked like they've been serious about trying to win anything meaningful? I mean, this is the same team that didn't allow Phillip Rivers to win the Super Bowl. This is the same team that wasted a Hall of Fame level quarterback for Phillip Rivers for several years, and they're doing the same thing with Justin Herbert. Look, we know that this ownership doesn't have a history of firing coaches during the season, but Brandon Staley is so bad of a coach that you got to just pull the plug on him. Your playoff hopes are going down the drain. You can't win close games. You can't beat good teams. I mean, after they blew that big lead to the Jacksonville Jaguars in the wild card round last year, I was for sure certain that they were going to fire Brandon Staley and they were going to go after Sean Payton. And Sean Payton, I'm pretty sure he would have been okay with taking way less money than what he's getting paid at Denver to take this job. But the fact that they brought Brandon Staley back for another season just shows us all that the Chargers are not really serious about trying to be a winning organization. I mean, like, seriously, they drafted Quentin Johnston over Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, Josh Downs. There were so many better wide receivers that got taken, not just before Quentin Johnston, but after he was drafted. This ownership, this front office, I don't think they care about winning. Because if they did, they wouldn't allow Brandon Staley to continue to allow this to be a losing operation. Anytime these boys play a good team, they lose. I mean, they lost to Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers. I mean, if that wasn't the final draw in the line for them to part ways with Brandon Staley, I don't know what it is. Now, Jordan Love and them have been playing some good football, but you're a defensive-minded coach making it look like you're running a JV defense for Jordan Love to just dissect. If this organization was serious about winning, they would have made changes. You see, the teams that actually care about winning, they're not cheap. They're not afraid to spend whatever it takes to get the best of the best to win. The Chargers, yeah, they spent some money in free agency, but some of it hasn't been well spent. They were paying a lot of money to J.C. Jackson, and he was pretty much scamming those boys. It was so bad that the general manager had to go into his locker room and tell the team, hey, I'm sorry that we gave so much money to a shitty player. Is this organization really committed to trying to win? It may sound like I'm trying to be funny, but I'm dead serious right now because I don't think they are. You got Justin Herbert, one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't think you guys just realize how talented Justin Herbert is to be able to overcome how bad this situation has been since he got drafted to Los Angeles. This dude is potentially about to be on his third head coach. Most quarterbacks that get drafted this high who have to overcome this amount of coaching staff changes end up being bust. And yeah, you got people calling this dude overrated when this defense hasn't held up their end of the bargain for what? Never. I mean, the Chargers' best defensive performance with Brandon Staley at the helm as head coach was when they beat the Dolphins on Sunday Night Football last season. That was about it. Justin Herbert is getting wasted by an organization that doesn't seem like they're all that committed to trying to do what it takes to win. Because if they really did, they would go out there and spend the money that it costs to get a top-notch head coach. They could have had Doug Peterson. They could have had Sean Payton. If Sean Payton was the head coach of the Chargers right now, this is probably a team that's in the Super Bowl discussion right now, and they probably have one of the best records in the NFL. Brandon Staley was hired after being the defensive coordinator for the Rams for one season, and he's running a defense that isn't good, and he won't give up the play calling. When you have a head coach that lacks accountability, that's a great sign that that dude isn't it. With the defense being as bad as what it's been, there's no reason why he should still be the head coach of this organization, of this franchise. Now, the defense didn't play bad against Baltimore, but once again, they came up flat in big game situations. This dude is overly aggressive on fourth down. He doesn't have great in-game decision making. He doesn't have great clock management. He doesn't take accountability. This is somebody who shouldn't be a head coach. And instead of the Chargers going out there and spending top-notch money for a guy like Sean Payton, they instead to opt to be cheap with a bottom of the barrel head coach in Brandon Staley. This is one of the worst head coaches in NFL history. I don't care if he made it to the playoffs. There's been bad coaches to make it to the playoffs before. If you play a weak schedule and you got a talented quarterback like Justin Herbert and a really good team, it's possible to make it to the playoffs. But bad coaches don't make it out of the wild card round. Brandon Staley was lucky to make it to the playoffs in 2022 because they took advantage of playing bad quarterbacks. They don't have a winning record against teams with good quarterbacks for a reason. And the main reason is because his defense is ass. So I really don't think the Chargers are serious about trying to win, especially when they continue to allow Brandon Staley to keep his job when they're on a 3-game losing streak. And Kellen Moore, I think he gives you a better shot to save your season and turn things around than what Brandon Staley does. You already seen what you got in him. You should have kicked him to the curb last season after he lost in the playoffs the way that he did. And instead, they continue to allow another bad regime to waste another talented quarterback, just like they did with Phillip Rivers. Before we move on, if you haven't already and you're new, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We go live Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Remember that every episode of the podcast is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. Before we move on, we got to play a word from our sponsor. Make sure that you go ahead, get you a Starry projector light. That's what you see in the background here. It'll be a great Christmas gift for your friends, families, and acquaintances. So we're going to play that ad real quick, and we're going to move on to our next topic. Man, are you tired of looking at your stale, boring-ass room? You want to know a way you can spice your room up and turn that thing into an out-of-this-galaxy experience? Click the link in the description or pinned comment and grab you a Starry projector light. The Starry projector light comes with 10 changeable color options, a built-in Bluetooth speaker, 12 and 15 switchable constellations, planets, moons, and stars. Transform your room from a depressing wasteland into a vibrant starry wonderland. The Starry projector light makes for a great holiday gift for family, friends, and loved ones. Click the link in the description or pinned comment and get one today and transform your room into a breathtaking, starry wonderland. Michigan beat Ohio State again for the third straight year in a row. And Ryan Day, you just got to ask yourself, what is it going to take for the Buckeyes to be able to finally turn this rivalry around? Because there was no reason why Ryan Day shouldn't have been able to win this game. Of course, Michigan is just as talented as a team as what Ohio State is, but the fact that this dude got outcoached by Sharon Moore is a problem. You see, the difference in why Michigan won that game and why Ohio State is now having their third straight loss that they have to deal with is because Michigan was way more aggressive and they came out like they wanted it more. And I'm not saying that Ryan Day is a soft coach, but Ohio State, anytime they play Michigan, they just look soft. They just get scared in big moments, it seems like. And Ryan Day is a really good coach. This is one of the best coaches in college football. This dude has never had any more than 2 losses in the season. So, of course, you shouldn't fire this dude. But at the same time, you know, there has to be some changes that has to be made. Because for some reason, when it comes to a mentality standpoint, Jim Harbaugh and the guys in that Michigan locker room, they just are wired differently every time they play Ohio State. Ohio State, they put so much into this offseason of focusing on beating Michigan. And yet Michigan didn't even pay these dudes no mind. They're focused on the national championship. And you know, when you play Michigan, despite them being cheaters and them getting caught cheating, stealing signs, one thing about this team is that when you play them, not only are you about to be in a football game, but you're about to go to war for 60 minutes. These dudes are tough, they're gritty, they're scrappy, they're nasty, and they're flat out mean and physical. And Ohio State, every time they play Michigan, they just lack the same intensity that Michigan has. And I don't know what pregame speech Ryan Day gives these guys before the game, but he may need to go ahead and pay some money to get Ray Lewis in there. Next season when Ohio State plays Michigan, he needs to bring in Ray Lewis to get those boys amped up. Because for some reason, they just don't come out the locker room with a lot of juice when they play Michigan. I mean, when Michigan beat Penn State, Blake Corum's nose was fucking bleeding, bruh. These are warriors. In Ohio State, they don't have this warrior mentality when they play Michigan. Now, Ryan Day is a really good football coach, but there's been a couple of games that I've watched when his team has just got dominated physically and mentally. You remember when they lost to Oregon a couple of years ago when Mario Cristobal was down there in Eugene? Oregon was just more tougher and more rougher and more physical than what Ohio State is. And you see, it's funny because Ohio State fans take so much pride in being wide receiver U. And they're really good at finding good wide receivers and really good cornerbacks. And they do recruit good amount of talent up front on both sides of the football. But for some reason, Michigan up front is just a way different animal. It's just way tougher than what Ohio State is. Ohio State, they're more finesse in my opinion. You know, they say styles make fights. Ohio State is really good at going toe-to-toe with teams that aren't able to make them pay for not being as tough as what they need to be up front. When they played Georgia, even though Georgia had a really good defensive line, C.J. Stroud was a good enough quarterback that he was able to give them a shot to win that game. But when they played Michigan, though, and they were able to slow down Ohio State's wide receivers, and this was a game that Ohio State had to win up front, they weren't able to do it. And when you're playing in a conference like Big Ten in the middle of the country, when it gets cold as hell in November, October, and December, you got to be able to handle yourself up front. And Ohio State, they can handle everybody in this conference but Michigan. Michigan just has too much of a warrior mentality. If you ever watched the WWE back in the 90s when it was the WWF, they used to have this wrestler who used to come out super amped up. And I used to love him. Even though I didn't get to watch him when, you know, before I was born, because I was born in 2002, but when I be watching WWF reruns and they put the Ultimate Warrior out there and he's banging on his chest like a gorilla and doing like sit-ups and shit like that, that's the kind of juice that Ohio State needs to have anytime they play Michigan. They need to have that same level of intensity. They don't have that when they play Michigan. For some reason, like, Michigan is just ready to go to battle. On Ohio State, they just don't have that same mentality when they play Michigan. It's just that they're all about getting these nice receivers, and they do got some really good guys on the defensive line. But Michigan, what they're doing on the offensive line and defensive line and recruiting is obviously something that Ohio State needs to start doing themselves, because this team just lacks the physicality and mentality that it takes to beat a team like Michigan. Michigan was 3 of 3 in fourth down situations. Ohio State didn't go for it on fourth down once. Ohio State was playing from behind ever since Kyle McCord threw that interception early in the game. And once that happened, Ohio State couldn't find a way to get off the field. Meanwhile, Michigan was throwing everything out there to try to win this game. They were running trick plays. J.J. McCarthy was throwing his body on the line. I mean, Michigan just plays like a team that just wants to win. Ohio State, they played that game